What is happening out there, Roto Scouts basketball fans? Welcome to a Wednesday show, gang. Happy hump day. Not sure who I'm talking to yet. Kind of last minute scheduled show. Quiet chat so far. We just opened up the room a couple minutes ago, so we'll let some people trickle in. I was trying to play that balancing act, waiting on news. Decided to let it run through 4:30, but then I didn't want to let it get all the way to 5 o'clock and run into another half hour and then an hour in the middle of the show. So I figured, what the hell? We've got a board set that went through Sims. We didn't get any crazy news at 4:30 outside of Benedict Mathurin now questionable. So I just kind of hit the go live button. Here we are. So welcome to the show. Hope everybody's week is going well. Work week and so on. Nice warm day here in the New Jersey area after a little stretch of cold. It's in like the 50s today. Not bad out. 47 according to the screen in front of me here, but 50 per the Alexa out in the other room. Shouldn't say that so loud. Of course, I say the actual name it's supposed to respond to. Doesn't do anything. The TV says like Bob Johnson, and it's like, bing, can I help you? So weird. Handful of people here already. Good to see you guys. So just to kind of dive in, we've got a 9-gamer. Pretty solid looking slate overall. We've got a lot of information early. There weren't a lot of teams on back-to-backs or anything today. So we had a decent amount of the news, fairly early in the day. We've got all sorts of value all over the board already. Only a few known unknowns right now as far as questionables, but some key guys currently questionable. And then we're going to have all sorts of pandemonium, chaos, and unpredictable nonsense, kind of like we did last night. Hopefully you guys made out okay last night. Kind of a dispiriting slate overall, in my opinion. Just a little 4-gamer, and you get multiple pieces of nonsense with people being ruled out late, and then all of a sudden Steph Curry's not playing. Clint Capella, we got the news that he was, Mohamed Gui was going to be in the starting lineup, so people went to Capella thinking secure backup minutes, and then it just turned out he was in street clothes. 2 minutes after lock, they decided to let us know that. Some more chaos like that throughout the evening. AD, after we talked about it on the show yesterday, checked out of the game midway through the first quarter. Specifically brought up on this show yesterday. I said, that doesn't happen that often this year. Hurt his abs, I think was the report. Hurt abdomen. Anyway, more chaos like that, I'm sure, on tap for us tonight. But we'll talk about the slate and what we know about it right now. Let me get into the Vegas board. First game's getting updated right now. Detroit at Indy. The last time I saw was Indy favored by 7 in a home game. 230 point total there. One of the better totals on the board, but we've got several right in that 229 to 233 range. A couple really low ones, and then just one pretty big high one with the New York and Denver game up at 242. So that one, at least a mid-board type game with a couple of appealing players on both Detroit and Indy. Brooklyn at Charlotte. The Charlotte side of this one, despite a ludicrously low total compared to the rest of the board, Charlotte just without most of their NBA players, so they're creating value just on cheap guys, but you're getting a lot of mediocre to bad to non-NBA type talents in a game with a 204.5 point total. So everybody does come with a little bit of just caution, but we're getting absurd amounts of everybody. Brooklyn side of that one, not so much, kind of ugly over there too, though. They're missing everybody. Toronto at Washington, 230.5 point total there. I'm reading off the, I forgot to switch back to the other screen. Toronto at Washington, Toronto favored by 6 in a road game, 230 point total. Two really bad teams. I would prefer to be on the Toronto side of that one, I think, and I think the results are going to bear that out as we go through the Sims. But it's not the most appealing couple of teams on the board. The Cavs and the Heat in an interesting one. Still no Jimmy Butler for the Heat. Cavs are favored by 7 on a road game in Miami. 224.5 point total. No Darius Garland for Cleveland. Creating a little bit of an uptick for some of those guys. Kind of an interesting spot. Still no Karis LeVert for Cleveland either. The aforementioned Denver at the Knicks. Knicks favored by 2.5 in a home game at MSG. 242 point total. Fully healthy on both sides. Should be a good one. A lot of pieces from that one that are, at worst, playable. I'm not sure how much is going to come crashing its way through the sim as we look through it, though. But I'm sure we'll see some of the Knicks starters. We'll see some Jokic. Probably some Murray in there. Maybe some MPJ. The Bulls and the Celtics, pace up spot for the Celtics for sure, going up against that garbage Bulls team. The Celtics are favored by 14.5 here. You do have a little bit of back-end blowout risk. 228-point total, though. I think we can easily get to some of the top-end Celtics. A couple question marks as far as who's in, who's out for them. A couple missing pieces on the Chicago side as well, potentially creating some value. So, at worst, a highly playable game. Sacramento and Philly, an 8-point game there. Sacramento favored on the road in Philadelphia. 231.5 point total in that one. The Sacramento side, from the start of the pool of 5 starters, basically anybody, as usual, is going to look okay. On the Philly side, Maxey off the top end. Everybody else is basically out again. We may see some of the Ricky Council debate go back and forth. That was another one that Justin Edwards ended up getting the start. After the show, I did end up favoring Justin Edwards a little bit more than I had been, and it trended in that direction up until we got the starting lineup confirmed, and then I kind of jumped on it a little bit more. I think I knocked Council down to 24 minutes, I want to say, and he ended up playing less than that, but ended up being the more valuable of those two by a pretty wide margin. So, fun having those results when it's like, you follow everything, you get it all right, all the way lined up, and then the original outcome comes through anyway. It's so dumb. So dumb. Where were we? Last 2 games up. Dallas at New Orleans. Close game there. One of the competitive games on the slate. Just a 1-point spread favoring Dallas on the road against the Pellies. 234-point total in that one. Still no Luka for Dallas. Pieces and parts at worst, I think, and then that messy Pelly squad. I'm not sure if anybody's really going to come crashing out of that one, but that is the second highest total on this slate. So at worst, it's going to be a relevant game, and it's also, again, the closest game in terms of the point spread. And then to round things out, the Clippers and the Spurs. 4-point game there, 221-point total. Clippers favored on the road against San Antonio. I would take some Wemby shares. Not sure what else is going to come up. Maybe some of the top end of the Clippers. But I doubt we see too much of that game. It's an interesting slate, too. Nice quick sprint through the evening. The last game started at 8. Both sites cut the last 2 games of the night. So we've got 11 NBA games today, but just 9 on the board today. What is it? 1, 2, 3. 3 of them start at 7. Then 4 at 7:30, and then the last 2 at 8 o'clock. So it's going to be a very rushed, very tight, busy hour there, but then we free up for the rest of the night, which is good. Not a ton of reason on a slate like this to really worry too much about where your guys are falling as far as I want to have room for late swaps and crazy news. We've already got a ton of information. We're going to have a bunch more ahead of lock or shortly thereafter. So it's really about those 7:30 games, I think. And then the 8 o'clocks, there might be some opportunity in them, but they're a little bit tighter. Michael Knack is here. Theodore Parson is here. Tizzlemane's here. I'm losing till I win the Millie. Still here. Good to see everybody. Handful of folks in the room. Hit the like button as we get started if you get a chance. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Check out rotoscouts.com. Everything at Rotoscouts. NBA, NHL, the Super Bowl. Anything else I can come up with in between now and the start of MLB season, including what I keep on promising and threatening and have to get on top of, season-long baseball stuff. But baseball right around the corner. Access all of it, all in, under $1 a day on any of the plans, weekly, monthly, quarterly. Jump on those, check it out. Gets you access at worst to every main slate of hockey and basketball projections for the next week for under $7. And then you get through the Super Bowl the following week. So, a lot going on still over the next few weeks running into spring training. We'll see about doing some spring training slates. I usually don't, but maybe it's just such a pain to put all those players through the model because they don't really exist in that universe, a lot of the minor league guys and spring training invitees and such. But anyway, we'll talk about that in the future. Check that stuff out. Sims, as usual, run over at Ace Mind. Real quick note, these guys, I forgot to change them to from zero ownership when the sim ran. None of them are relevant at all. Just on the DK side, you can see they did not come up on FanDuel. I'm just going to take them off the board. That's my mistake. Apologies for that. And there we go. So we had a question in the chat. How many Hornets in a lineup for you? So you can see a couple of those guys at the absolute top of the board with Josh Okogie, Musa Diabate, and Nick Smith, all kind of dominating shares. Everybody in our top 150, 40+%. with one guy really pulling a ton of it. 92% of our lineups have Josh Okogie. So I would say him plus one of the other two at worst. And I think all three of those guys perfectly fine. The idea of you can only have X amount of guys from one team is not really that much of a thing. There's going to be enough time. There's going to be enough production with those guys at value for where they're priced for this slate, for the way that they fit in, and just provide the stepping stones to get to everything else. You do also have Ty Jerome on the slate now. That came up after Darius Garland got ruled out. He's only 4,400. I've got him up at 28 minutes. He's played this season at 1.16. Kind of an interesting piece. Come on. I forgot to set up the other board. For the month of, since the start of the year, in the closest approximation of this situation that we could come up with, he's played at 0.95. Since the beginning of December, he's played at 1.0. That's what I gave him today, which could potentially actually be a little bit light. And you can see how much he's coming up. We got him 52% of the time, but a little bit behind the field on DraftKings. So at worst, I do think that's a interchangeable piece with the various pieces of Charlotte, most particularly up at the top with Okogie. But you can go back and forth with some of those values now that he's on the board. So if you're concerned about having three guys from Charlotte, you can just go in the other direction. And the reason to be concerned there would be that just low overall game total. That does create a bubble in which, fewer overall points exist, if that makes sense. And that's what when game environments have come up in the past, people have mentioned, you mentioned game environment too much, which I don't feel like I do at all. But at least one specific time that came up that I'm thinking of. And that's the way I try to describe it is, what the reason to talk about the point spread, the game totals, the overall pace and possessions numbers is because that informs the overall shape in which all of the possibilities, all of the different outcomes, all the variables exist. But there is an overall cap on that, and it's got some room to be inflated or deflated. It's more like a balloon, right? But things exist inside the balloon. So that's what inflates or deflates around the shape of the slate. And then all the possibilities, all the churn exists within that. So for that reason, you could maybe mount a better argument today with that total being so uniquely low at 204 as compared to a lot of other days where our low totals of the day are in the 220 or the two teens rather. That's a uniquely low total. So you could kind of mount that argument about too many players from that game. But right now, the way the numbers are coming through with those salaries and the values that those guys are presenting, it just doesn't matter. Even with that total, if that total were any higher, these guys would just be coming up more, and we're already getting them more than 50%. So 3 is fine. Same deal on FanDuel, by the way. We're getting massive shares of all of those guys. We are getting Ty Jerome lighter than the field again on both sites. More dramatically light on the FanDuel slate, it looks like, where we're at 45%. Still plenty in our pocket, but that looks lower than the field. Again, you could give him more rate than I did. But I think in this spot, especially against Miami, it's not exactly a fantastic game in this one in and of itself with Cleveland and Miami. So I don't really want to push the edges beyond what he's played over again since the start of December. It's not a gigantic sample, but it's what we've got to work with. Let's get into it. Talk some guards. Get things started. Oh, I didn't do the ins and the outs. The other thing that it informs a lot of this game environment, or a lot of the bubble in which these games exist, these possibilities exist. So I mentioned Ben Mathurin now questionable. Probables, all of Tyler Hero, Jaime Jaquez, and Duncan Robinson are available, as is DeJounte Murray, and we actually don't have probables. Questionables, Andrew Nembhard, Grady Dick, Kelly Olynyk, Kobe White, Sam Hauser, Al Horford, Jason Tatum, so some relevant Celtics there. Sam Merrill, Josh Hart is questionable for the Knicks, but I fully expect Josh Hart to play and probably play 40 minutes. Najee Marshall, Caleb Martin, both questionable. Caleb Martin moved up from being out over the last few games. Somewhat relevant. Outs, Bojan Bogdanovic, Noah Clowney, Cam Johnson, Mac Lewis, D'Anthony Melton, Cam Thomas, Tariq Whitehead, LaMelo Ball, Josh Green, Trey Mann, Cody Martin, Brandon Miller, Tijani Salon, who is in the G League as of the last time I checked. Grant Williams, Mark Williams are all out. That's essentially all of the NBA relevant players for both the Nets and the Hornets, at least for the most part. Just really ugly there. Jaden Ivey, Isaiah Jackson, James Wiseman, Emmanuel Quickly, Marvin Bagley, Sadiq Bey, Malcolm Brogdon, Alexander Sarr, Torrey Craig, Zach LaVine, Darius Garland, Karis LeVert, Isaac Okoro, Dean Wade, Jimmy Butler, Josh Richardson, Drew Smith, Vlatko Konkar, Pakama Diadier, Mitch Robinson, Andre Drummond, Joel Embiid, Paul George, KJ Martin, Jared McCain, Luka Doncic. Dante Exum moved up to doubtful, but I would assume that means he's still not going to play. He's been out most of the season. Maxi Kleba, Derek Lively, Dwight Powell, Jordan Hawkins, Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, Carlo Makovich, Chris Dunn, and PJ Tucker are all out. Just because we had a lot of news early doesn't mean a lot of guys aren't out. Ridiculous. All right, so let's see. Guard-wise. I did sort that, right? Yep. So we've talked about Ty Jerome off the top, but again, no Garland. It's going to presumably give him the opportunity to play some minutes here. And he has been good. The overall numbers for the season, 114, 116 for the full season as far as his per minute rates. But in this situation, that rate has been lower. So again, I went with the lower overall number. It's still a good number, 0.95 or 1.0. But you could give him a little bit more than that. So if anything, you get him a little bit more. Maybe you're getting him around the field. I also like being in the realistic number because it gives us a position relative to the field where we've still got an absolute ton of them on both sides, but we've got a position rather than just being with everybody. Nick Smith looking pretty massive on FanDuel where he's only 4,300 with all those guys on Charlotte out. Great opportunity for him. He's very, very cheap on the FanDuel site. Slate 6.27 value score that's one of our top highest on FanDuel. I don't think it's our pure top highest. Yeah. A lot of big value scores today. So Diabate at 6.92 is our pure overall highest. We've also got Joval there at 6.36 though. Kind of a significant competitive center from the center value tier with a very realistic per minute upside, but kind of limited minutes. And then it's Nick Smith at 6.27. So some very, very strong values on the FanDuel board. Nick Smith, though, on DraftKings, shooting guard and small forward eligible, level with the field. We still got him 41% of the time, but at 5,000, he's less valuable. He doesn't hit nearly as hard as some of his teammates, some of the other pieces, Ty Jerome. But you can definitely get to him, and you should have him in not half, but more than a third of your lineups. It is a spot where, especially considering the player, 0.74 on FanDuel, 0.78 this season on DraftKings, most particularly on DraftKings where we're just level with the field. It is a spot where I would say maybe you could consider pushing that down a little bit, take a little bit less just to establish a position against the field. And it's a guy, given the low end per minute and the abundance of options today, I think I'd rather have a negative position than a positive one if I'm going away from the field. I also don't think there's anything wrong with just being pure with the field on that one, though. Russ, 23% flat with the field on FanDuel, 36% flat with the field on DraftKings. Obviously like him a little bit better at the DK price. Above our value threshold on both sites, though. Reasonable per minute production, 116 for the season. Outside of the Russ Westbrook of it, the production's been there. At least in a fantasy sense. Come on. We're at 115 for him for this game. So essentially right on production. They technically lose a little bit from the top end going up against the Knicks. Knicks, not a overly fast-paced team. But this game, again, with that monster total and being the highest, it's not shaving all that much off. So basically everybody in this one around an are who they are spot, and that's making Russ look decent at the prices. Game in the Garden, if you like the whole narrative thing. Russ certainly wanted to chase that a little bit. Jalen looking like a solid piece. 34% for just 8,100. That's not a bad price to find Jaylen Brown in this nice pace-up, bouncy spot against Chicago. You also, again, do have all of Sam Hauser, Al Horford, and Jason Tatum still questionable. So we could have increased opportunity in a great spot for Jaylen Brown. So worst case, I think Jaylen just gets better looking from here. This is as bad as he's going to look, and we're getting him 34% of the time. He's above our value threshold on FanDuel, just above the mark at 551 on DraftKings, where he's only 7,600. Very, very cheap. 36%, that's one where I would take a plus position if I was choosing to go against the field in a direction. Give me more of Jaylen Brown against this lousy Bulls team for 7,600 of those positions. 114 per minute for that price, that's cheap. I remember to put everybody back on the board. That feels cheap, but it's maybe not as cheap as I thought it was. Positionally, it works out a little bit. 76, shooting guard and small forward. You get 114 out of Jaylen. At point, you can get 116 out of Giddey on the other side of that one, but give me Jaylen every time against the Bulls rather than Giddey against the Celtics. Power forward, center, you're getting production out of those spots, but different positionally, obviously, pretty dramatically. And then we're already down 500-600 less once we start talking about some of these numbers. Jordan Poole, and I'd much rather have Jaylen Brown against Chicago than Jordan Poole against basically anybody. And then looking above 77 with position commonality at small forward, as good as he's been, Josh Hart gets there on minutes, not on per minute, 1.01. Full 0.13 shy of the mark. And then you start getting up 200 more. You can get 1.21 at small forward out of RJ Barrett in a good spot. That one you can make a strong argument for today. But in a lot of cases, give me Jaylen over RJ Barrett. And then there's, again, not a lot of positional commonality until you get up to this 84 at shooting guard. And then it's Donovan Mitchell with no Darius Garland. You're talking about a different kind of thing. So I think that is some pretty nicely priced potential production on Jaylen Brown in a great, great spot for the Boston side that could get even better if some of those guys don't play. Get this out of the way. Now I can see the chat. Power saying Mathurin late questionable. Nemhard has a questionable. Siakam ownership will explode. Siakam's going to be a decent spot. No doubt about it. Back to sorted for guards here. It's just that game in general. It's not the right one. We're not getting a ton of that game at all. Right? 15% of Cade on FanDuel was really the only piece of that game we're getting. And this is with everybody back on the board. But if you get either of those guys coming off the board, you'll see a little uptick. If you get both of those guys coming off the board, you'll see an uptick. And then there's obviously downstream impact for some of these other dudes. But yeah, give me more of Siakam in that situation. Give me more of Tyrese Halliburton in that situation. More than the 0 that I got on both sides. We did get 1% of Siakam at 7,500 on DraftKings. We got a little bit more at nearly 5% on FanDuel for 79. But right now, this entire game just looks like a collection of guys that are just role players on as far as the shape of this slate, with apologies to the fantastic production from Cade Cunningham and some of these other guys. That's more a factor of just how he's priced. But not really the craziest, most relevant spot right now. But yeah, if things change around those guys, you're going to be seeing a lot more of them. Coach is the talk of the day, no doubt about it. Chalk of the day. OMG Lulz, what's going on? Oh, is there a late question on Sam Merrill too? I didn't see that. Or did I? Did I have that one? Yeah, I had Sam Merrill on the question. That came out later, I guess, in the day. Depends on where you start your day. This one took forever. For whatever reason. I started working on this one at like 11:30, and I didn't finish until like after 2:30 or maybe 2:15, somewhere on there, whenever that first episode went up. Took a long time to get through this first set of projections today. I don't expect we have a ton of it, Mamba. No, that's San Antonio. I clicked on the wrong game again. There's Sacramento. FanDuel really low owned for both those teams. DraftKings, you're getting some Kelly Oubre in there. So it looks like more coming out of the Philly side of that one. Really not much of Sacramento at all. As I said in the run-up, any shares of any of those starters from Sacramento, as usual, are fine. Those guys play tons of minutes. They're always available. In some ways, that is preferable to when teams like the Cavs roll in and they play lower 30s minutes versus teams like the Knicks, like the Kings, that play significantly higher minutes in the upper 30s on average for their starters. There is appeal to that, but those guys really didn't come up all that much on either side. We do have 30% of $6,100 Kelly Oubre to talk about. We've got some Maxey. We've got some Keegan Murray coming through. A little bit of Justin Edwards, assuming that he's in the starting unit again at 4,200 on FanDuel, 39 on DraftKings. He's our most highly exposed piece from that game on the FanDuel slate, which is kind of interesting. If it's Ricky Council in that role, that could flip. I've got Ricky just for 20 minutes. He only played 19 and a half yesterday, but he put up 33.4 FanDuel points compared to Justin Edwards, who put up 23.3 in 29 minutes and burnt everybody who followed that position throughout the day. Of course, that was the way that was going to go. Some days the DFS gods just do not approve of us for whatever reason. So a little bit of Sabonis, a little bit of Fox is coming up right now, and taking more than that on any of Fox, Sabonis, DeRozan, Keegan Murray, perfectly fine. Malik Monk also. He's coming up the least. But yeah, not massive shares, Mama, of either of those teams. Power can't wait to see Levine join Wemby at the trade deadline. Yeah, they've got him out for personal reasons, but I think it's a case where those personal reasons are they just want to put him on the shelf until they can trade him. I think. I don't actually know what is going on in his life, so I shouldn't speculate. But that was the immediate impression that I got when I saw that news. So, yeah, I would expect him to move. That would be a fun landing spot. I wouldn't mind that at all. I haven't really caught up on a lot of the trade rumors yet. I've got a handful of podcasts downloaded that I got to jump on and listen to and catch up on where everybody's at. I've actually been following the NHL trade deadline a little bit because just I'm curious to see what the Rangers do. It's such a messy season this year. Is this like the Mamba fire call of the day? Got to get a sponsor for that. The Mamba fire call of the day, brought to you by Buffalo Wild Wings. Played Sabonis triple-double last 2 games and going to double down today. Odds are too good to pass up. He should get another 20-plus rebound game, says Mamba. All right. Mamba likes that one. Where is he in the overall? Let's see. I mean, what I love about that play is you're talking about a guy who just fills statistical categories, right? In addition to the tremendous true shooting, 25.6% assist rate, 19.8% rebounding rate. He's averaging 14.6 on the rebound, 6.5 assists. So, I mean, on average, you're most of the way there. So it's never a crazy bet with Sabonis. So as long as you're getting a nice price, I like it. Oh, is it paternity leave? All right. Again, I shouldn't speculate then. Or I should at least check these things. They timed that well. Last year, 9 months ago, he was saying, this will be about the trade deadline. Let's shoot for this one. Anyway. Get back to the guards here. Jalen Brunson coming up a decent amount, actually. I'm happy about that. 27% of Jalen Brunson on the FanDuel slate is basically level with the field. I would expect more of Jalen and Karl Anthony Towns just from the top end of the Knicks than the Josh Harts, Mikal Bridges of the world. Here's Bridges, 10% FanDuel, 4% DraftKings. Is OG a forward only on these? I think so. There's Deuce. He doesn't matter at all. So a little bit probably of mix and match through Hart, Bridges, and OG. And then I would expect we'll see a decent share of Cat. Both him and Brunson pull pretty solid rates in this spot. Again, a very juicy total. Solid game on both sides, just created by that overall game environment, but it's more appealing on the Knicks side of it. And we're getting a little bit more public ownership overall on the Knicks side, but we're at or ahead of the field, I think, on the key Knicks. So I like that Brunson position. He's over the value threshold that we're looking for on FanDuel, just shy of the mark on DraftKings, which is probably why we're pulling 20% and behind the field. But we still have him in 1 in 5 DK lineups, looking pretty good with a solid top end. Donovan Mitchell with more to do, given no Darius Garland. Solid, but tends to produce around his typical number in at least the sample that I pulled before. I'll give it a more extended sample when I update later on. I'll make sure that we get him in the correct range, but I think we're pretty zeroed in. Looks good, but we are a little bit lighter than the field on both. 24%, nearly 1 in 4 lineups on FanDuel, but behind the field, 16% behind the field on the FanDuel slate. Again, the Cleveland-Miami just overall matchup is not the most appealing on this slate. It's entirely playable, and we do have value coming out of it now with Ty Jerome. But it's not the greatest when you just smash those teams together a bunch of times. It gets grindy amongst the bigs, and you could definitely see Donovan Mitchell showing up a little bit. But overall, it's not creating too many dynamite situations. Koulibaly, there is appeal in that Washington-Toronto game. Two bad teams playing against each other at a relatively high pace. It's not a bad spot to create some fantasy points just in amongst cheap to fairly priced mediocre players. Koulibaly, 0.84 per minute on FanDuel, 0.83 per minute on DraftKings this season, 13% exposed for 5,700 on the DraftKings slate. That's just a better value fit on FanDuel. It's way above the value threshold on FanDuel at 5.27. On DraftKings, we're just at 5.32. So giving you a little bit more juice on the FanDuel slate, multi-position eligible over there. If I had to choose a position against the fields, excuse me one second. I'm going to yell at my dog. Joker! Get your head out of that food bag. You think I can't hear that from here? Come here. He's in the other room. The opportunist. He's like, oh, when Dad starts talking to himself at that desk for 2 hours, I can go do whatever I want. He never comes into this room. I can hear him. He had his head in, there's like a big bag of dog food, and with a hole about that big. His head is significantly bigger than that. What were you doing? Were you being bad? Yeah, you go lie down. Goon. Yeah, man. Anyway, the cat's all locked up. That's why I was like, what is that noise? And then I realized he wasn't right here next to my foot. So, as I was saying, I struggle to say that I would want a big plus position on Koulibaly. So maybe we just take him with the field. But if I'm 25 instead of 35, I think I'm kind of okay with that. Not the best per minute guy, but also not the worst. You know, he checks in around average usage. 0.84 is not one of these Misic 0.68 types. Speaking of, we also have a ton of him on FanDuel. FanDuel still got him at 4,800. Eligible at both guard spots. 5.81 value score for Misic. Got him at 32 minutes. There should be plenty of run available. We've just been disappointed in this spot numerous times already. He's not a good per minute player, but he sees plenty of opportunities to be one. 20.1% usage so far this season. Again, very, very few capable NBA players on either side of this game. So plenty of chance to shine, but in a similar spot the last time out, 14.4 FanDuel points in 33.2 minutes to illustrate the point that he can very easily give you around a half a point per minute. He's cheap. We're getting him in nearly half or more than half of all lineups on FanDuel at 53 on DraftKings. They took the opportunity out of it, 7.3% and below the field. It's still an okay value score. In a vacuum, that's a playable value, but this slate exists far outside of that vacuum. So you could easily have less than that to essentially none of it. You don't need to go all the way full none of it, but he's not nearly as relevant to the DraftKings slate. Still could succeed over there. I'm not saying don't play him, but not nearly the appeal that he's got on FanDuel. Scotty Barnes, a little bit light. Under 15% below the field, under 5% on DraftKings. I'm surprised by that. I would have expected a little bit more. Just where I had him today. Oops. I've got him a full 10th of a point per minute ahead of his production. You could give him a little bit more of a nudge than that. It's not an unhealthy spot on the Toronto side of that one. 118.5 implied points. Puts him essentially level with Sacramento, Cleveland, Denver. It's just the more you get carried away with that, the more you're giving him credit for things he doesn't necessarily create out there. But it's at worst not a bad spot for Scotty. So you can take a little bit more. I think if I was level with the field around 20, I'd be okay on FanDuel. Same deal, 10, 12 on DraftKings maybe. 93, 99. I think it's the price more than anything else. Jamal Murray did not arrive in any lineups on the FanDuel slate at 8,000. 7,300 on DraftKings, 4.6%. It's a spot where I could easily see Jamal Murray having a good game here against the Knicks. But again, the Denver side of that does take a little bit of a bite as far as pace. So, yeah, I'm okay. I wouldn't want to have none across 150 lineups. I would grab at least a few shares, but not coming up as a piece despite 1.05 per minute on both sites. On DraftKings, under 5%. He is a 5 value, but not the 5.5 we need over there. On FanDuel, he's way off the mark value-wise at 4.39, so that's really why we're not getting him. I think he's more of a ceiling play than he is a floor play. There's not much just pure value there unless he connects with the 2.5 standard deviation game, in which case he's going to be slate bending. So I don't see reasons to create a path to get to him outside of those just lotto ticket type shares. That's the upside he's got today. Cade on the FanDuel slate, again, that 15%, we are below the field there, but he's right on the mark at 5.0 as far as value goes. He is one of the better overall producers at 1.32 per minute at the position. Is that the top mark, actually? I think it is. Yeah, he's the best per minute producer by 5/100ths of a fantasy point per minute among guard-eligible players on the FanDuel slate. And I'm sure that is close to true on DraftKings. It is true on DraftKings by the same amount. So there's never a problem getting to Cade. And 15% is fine, but we do have a position there. I think that's one where it's okay to be there. If you end up with a little bit more in level with the field, it's not problematic, but I'd rather have the position. On DraftKings, I think maybe it might be worth pushing up to just level off with the field if that means you're essentially doubling this to 8-10%. And just have that is a good enough raw play for points on a slate that as much as there's value, as much as there's a lot of different options today, Cade is one of the top overall producers on this slate. So I wouldn't mind having a little bit more and just leveling off with the field on him. But he's not a standout value there by the same token. Murray, a mix and match piece on DraftKings. Same thing on FanDuel. Bridges, talked about already, 10%, 4% across sites. You'd have a little bit more at the expense probably directly of a Josh Hart or an OG. If you're just moving shares around between those guys, perfectly fine. Darren Fox, again, it's the same story with the Kings. I was talking about it before, how similar those two teams are as far as the minutes that the top five play. So if you're shuffling around shares between Fox and a couple of the other Kings, or if you're shuffling around shares between the Kings and the Knicks on opposite ends of this short slate, perfectly fine. There's a lot of just flexibility in good players with rock-solid upper to mid-30s minutes at similar prices that you can shuffle back and forth to chase pockets of leverage. Kyrie, non-critical across sites, 5% below the field on FanDuel, 2% below the field on DraftKings. Perfectly fine to have some, but not really standing out at 88, 9,000 on DK. CA 1047's here, likes Jokic on everything. We'll get to Jokic in a couple minutes. Actually, very, very shortly. Tyler Hero, 6%. Kobe White, 5% if he's out there. 3% of Norm Powell. Again, not expecting much from the Clippers side of that one. Not expecting much from the San Antonio side either, really. CJ McCollum at 5%, below the field, but closer to the field than some of those other guys. Nobody else really relevant, and none of those guys hitting the board on DraftKings. So a lot of these low-end, mid-20s type guys, this is not a good slate for pivoting into, I shouldn't have highlighted that far down, but like these Jaime Jaquez's, Terry Rozier's, Grady Dix, THT's, TJ McConnell with not enough minutes, Jose Alvarado, Miles McBride. The role player types on this slate, particularly among the guards, really lack appeal. And you can extend that up the board to a lot of these guys in the mid-20s, even the Malik Beasleys, the Spencer Dinwiddies, Keon Johnsons of the world. It's fine at the top end on this slate, but it gets really kind of thin and dicey through the middle. So I think this is not a day to be bouncing around the board where the math isn't encouraging you to go. Not that many days are that, but by comparison to the average day, I think this one, even more to the point, is not a day that calls for trying to defy the numbers. Oops. All right, getting centers on the board here as well. Where is the big fella? There he is. I wouldn't say he's landing in everything, unfortunately. I would love to have more. But again, the Denver side of that does take a minor hit overall. Knicks kind of a plodding team offensively, or not offensively, but pace-wise. Joker plays at a 1.81 on DraftKings. He's unrivaled in terms of production. If you're comparing to Wemby this year, he's a full 0.2 of a fantasy point per minute above Wemby. But that's also why he costs another $1,200 on top of a very, very expensive Wemby price. $900 more on FanDuel. It's not that we're getting much Wemby either. We've got very few shares of either player on the FanDuel slate. 1.3% closer to the field on Jokic. 2.6% more in our pocket, but further from the field, it looks like, on Wemby, which kind of tracks. On the DraftKings slate, 8%, 9%, pretty similar distributions to the slate. They're closer together on DK, it looks like. But yeah, Jokic with the ability to score at will against Karl Anthony Towns, with the ability to drop 80 fantasy points on any given slate or more. Perfectly fine to go to. You need 73, 75, somewhere in that territory out of him. Well within his capacity. I wouldn't mind having more. It's one of those plays where any given slate, superstars wise, if you can carry more, absolutely, you can feel free to click on it and carry more. Just especially with the most expensive player of the year on every slate. Know how that changes the overall shape of your lineups, of your full portfolio of lineups. Power says too many good centers on this slate to Jokic everything. And that's borne out by some of these guys up at the top. Diabate for one. We're getting him in 50% of FanDuel lineups. Basically, FanDuel's taken care of between those two. That is 92% of your center ownership on FanDuel is either Diabate or Joval. You're welcome. Thank you very much. Don't forget to tip your wages. Who's the other centers that are coming up? We have the one share of Jokic. No shares of any of the other center-only guys. So it's all amongst just random shares of the center power forward guys. That was these two. But the bulk of our center ownership on FanDuel is going to the two value guys. Joe Val is a differently priced option, but he's a much, much better per minute guy. We're talking about a player who, when he's out there, plays at 1.33 still on FanDuel, 1.35 on DraftKings. The issue with Joe Val is always just the minutes. He's averaging 19.6 minutes in 45 games this year. Got him in for a little bit of an uptick tonight with the shorthanded Washington team. It's fragile, I'll say that much. But I think they need him to play 22. The range is probably 22 to 26, with 26 being pretty thin odds. So you can take a little bit away from him, get to a little bit less. But right now, in a soft spot, looking like a pretty strong play on FanDuel. On DraftKings, 41% level with the field, a 6.19 value score. It should be pointed out, multiple guys in the sixes among the forwards and centers here. Diabate, just with no size for Charlotte right now, just going to get as much run as he can handle, I would assume. I only gave him 29. I think it's perfectly reasonable to give him 32 in this spot. He's a 6.92 value score at 29. That was enough. 7.14 for the 3,700 on DraftKings. He's playing at 0.86 overall for the season, 0.89 on the FanDuel scale. Come on. That's in just 18 minutes a night across 36 games. For tonight, I have him at 0.91 on the DraftKings scale. So 5/100ths of a point ahead of his current year production in a more advanced role against an absolute pushover of a Brooklyn opponent. It's a very, very soft spot for the Diabate play. I think there's upside beyond what's projected here. There could also be downside, though. You could get a 26-minute run here and less production. But I think he's cheap enough that it's kind of just safe as far as just unlocking value. We've got a lot of clearance from 5.5 in that 7.14 on DraftKings, from 5 in the 6.92 on FanDuel. Yeah, power, exactly. No SAR. I just think Joval, it's just about those additional few minutes for Joval. The per minute production has always been there. The usage is there when he plays. Nick Smith, we've talked about. Josh Okogie, just go back to that real quick. Again, another piece coming up from the Charlotte side of that. 5,400. He's one of the most relevant pieces on the FanDuel slate, but that's only half the ownership at 44% in our top 150 lineups that we're getting on DraftKings, where we got him in 92.6% of all lineups because he's only 4,300 and he has eligibility at both forward spots. So that puts another almost 7 value score on your DraftKings board coming out of that Charlotte team. That, again, is why you can easily play 3 guys from Charlotte without problem, despite the 204 total in that game. Okogie just looks pretty solid here. Played just 25 minutes in their last game. I've got him at 31, big uptick, but again, everybody's missing. He put up 34.4 FanDuel points in that 25. That's an outlier performance for Josh Okogie. But he's played this season, his 15 minutes a night, over 30 games at 1.03. So it's reason to believe that we could get good production for our money, even if it's not a point per minute. Jaylen Brown, I've talked about already. Jason Tatum, if he doesn't go, looks every bit as good, if not better, than Jaylen Brown does. We just have the opportunity to talk about Jaylen because he exists in a world where he's this and could get better if the other guys don't go. Tatum does have some of that, but Tatum being questionable himself kind of takes it away. But if there's no Horford out there, if there's no Sammy Hauser, there's a moderate impact as far as numbers go, just for taking some of that creation out of the offense and applying it elsewhere. I'll see exactly what the numbers do. I don't have it in my head. But we're already getting Tatum 50% of the time on the FanDuel slate. He's projected at a 50 for 9,700. That is pretty good value for your money. It's already putting him at a 5.18 FanDuel value. On DraftKings for 96, we're a little bit shy of the mark, 5.38, but still very strong looking, 32.6%. I wouldn't mind having a little more Tatum. I wouldn't mind having a little bit more Jaylen Brown. Between the two for 2,000 less, I would probably prefer the Jaylen Brown opportunity. They're not the same producer, 1.38 for Tatum, 1.14 for Jaylen. But I think the game situation and that $2,000 price difference probably makes up most of that gap. But I like where we're at with both of those guys. All we need is Tatum on the floor. Evan Mobley sees a nice spike in production in this situation. Going up against Miami again for both sides of this game. I don't love these guys colliding with those guys and vice versa. But I like the idea of some Evan Mobley shares here. We got 28 minutes in the last game. He put up a 44.3. He's still pretty cheap. 8,100 power forward and center eligibility on FanDuel. Got him 42% of the time, gently above the field, but a nice position above the field. At 7,900 on DraftKings, we got him 5.30 value score, 27% of the time, and level with the field. We do have a lot of balance on this slate where several guys in similar price ranges kind of came up at similar levels and level with the field. So you've got some maneuverability there, and Mobley's one where I'd be maybe interested in taking a little bit of an uptick. I wouldn't mind being 30-35 with a arrow that looks more like this against the field. I think that's a good spot for Evan Mobley. RJ, another play. So both Scotty and RJ came up a little bit lighter than I was speculating that they would when I was putting this together, but we did get RJ at 24% on FanDuel, below the field, but a solid amount. He's a 5+ value, perfectly playable. Again, pushover opponent. Raptors road favorites in this one by a wide margin. At 7,800, small forward only has a little bit of an impact for his value on the DraftKings slate. Is a 5.39 value over there, so a little bit shy of the mark. We still got him 18% of the time. I'd probably leave him in that range, maybe even take him at like 15. Still have a good amount, but lighten up a little bit just to establish the position even further rather than trying to chase him back up the ladder to the field. If you see him go up in projections, though, 42 is already generous. I think I gave him the full 0.1 on top, too. If I'm remembering correctly. 131. Yep. Exactly a tenth of a point on top. You can give him a little bit more, but it's another one where I wouldn't want to totally artificially just chase it for chasing its sake, especially on a big slate with a lot of really comparable options. But he's perfectly fine at worst. We got way less cat than I was expecting. Wow. But I know why, because he got boxed out by those plays. On DraftKings, cat's about where I figured. 17%. One of our more highly owned New York Knicks. 9,700, he's producing at 1.46 per minute on DraftKings. Got him at 1.50 for today, if I'm remembering correctly. Again, a little uptick on the New York side of that game. I don't mind having a little bit more cat. I don't think I would take it down from here. But positionally, he's one of the few guys in this range that we do have a established position on. So it's, again, probably one you don't chase back up the ladder, but it's nice to know we've got nearly 1 in 5 in our lineups. On FanDuel, it's interesting, though. If you're moving out of these spots, obviously it's a radically different price play, but he's one to keep in mind. It's just a situation where you'd be saying, instead of getting, who's even a comparable price? Tatum's even off by $500. Let's say Jason Tatum. If I'm moving off a few of those Jason Tatum shares just because I've got the room to do it, Karl Anthony Towns plus 500 is a reasonable person to look to for a little bit of just raw production, 1.43 on FanDuel. But important to note in that mix, he is slightly below our 5.0 value threshold, while knocking on the door of it, I'll say. So despite not getting any, I would want some here. I think that's one to highlight and say, all right, let's make sure that we do something to give Cat a little bit of a nudge into some FanDuel lineups. And it's going to be directly at the expense of that 90+%. Miles Bridges, 53% on FanDuel. We're above the field. He's only 7,700 there. Eligible at both forward spots. On DraftKings, I get not getting him a ton. He's 8,200 on DK. He's lower owned by the public. We only got him 13% of the time. That's less than the field. He's power forward only over there. He's off our value mark, 5.14. It's still a good raw score, but it's well off our 5.5 with a ton of guys above it. But on FanDuel, that 5.41 for the 7,700 is really standing out as a good value. It's just a fair NBA player on a game where there are very, very few guys. It's a spot where maybe it just pays, don't overthink it. Take the one good player from the Charlotte side to a decent degree. Half of all lineups seems about right. It's only gently above the field, but it is a position. 1.10 per minute as compared to basically everybody else in that game. Outside of Daron Sharp, who just doesn't play enough, unfortunately, to be really relevant all that often, although I'm now spotting, I missed this. 23-1 in their last game, put up a 37-5 as if to illustrate the point for me. I'm going to put a little flag on Daron. I got to check that out. I would love a good reason to buy Daron Sharp 23, 24 minutes on this slate. I don't think it's going to happen. But if he goes up appreciably, that could be a spot to jump on as an off-the-radar spot. Again, I don't think we're getting it. I have to look into why that happened. I had not noticed that. Kobe White is in. That's good. How's that for analysis? Kobe White is in. This is good. It's essentially me just checking it off in my head like one less thing to worry about. But that just puts everybody in that game essentially where they're at as far as what we've talked about now. I've got them projected in. Yeah, a little bit of a different scoring system, as Power's pointing out, but I think that just it's just kind of a general bias. He's answering Nuke's question. I don't see why there's so much hate for FanDuel amongst DFS content creators. Way bigger edge, just a worse layout. I actually greatly prefer the FanDuel layout. I think you guys are all nuts. I think DraftKings is not at all user friendly. I think it's terrible interface. Maybe I'm just used to FanDuel. FanDuel seems super straightforward, like click here, lineups are uploaded. I got to go like hunting for things on DraftKings, but again, I don't use it as much. But yeah, I think it's just a case where just over the years, DraftKings had the larger contests, the larger tournaments that appealed with the bigger prize pools, that appealed to the sharp players, to the pros, and so on, just more. FanDuel was always more chaotic and lower overall prize pools, and never really caught up. They did in terms of like entry fee versus prize pool, to a great degree, where like DraftKings a lot of the times is still $15, $20, $25 to get into the bigger tournaments. FanDuel runs a more abundance of $5 to $7 contests with $40 to $50 or $30 to $50,000 first place prizes. So there's a balance there, but I think the bias was created long ago, just by one having the larger market share out of the gate and kind of holding on to it. And when the people are yelling at you to not talk about a site, a lot of people will just kind of defer to that and stop talking about it. I've always talked about FanDuel because that's where I play. So it's just relevant for me, and it's the way that I process the slate for my own purposes. So even if nobody was here for FanDuel, I'd still be talking about it, which a lot of days I do think is the case. But yeah, going back to this, Miles Bridges is the most relevant player with the best per minute production out of this game, where we're getting just massive ownership. I mean, it is concentrated among those guys specifically, all from Charlotte, but that is 278% of FanDuel ownership, and among those 5 guys, 222 on DK. So I wouldn't mind taking the one guy in that group that I think of as a pretty relevant actual NBA player. What's up, Zevon? Forget if I skipped you over there as I was bouncing back and forth in those questions. Didn't mean to. Oh, Nembhard and Mathurin both ruled out. So we get a little downstream impact there for Indy. A little bit of a tickle up at the top as far as the rates go. I'll have to pull them and see exactly where we go. Let's see. I got Wowie handy enough. What do we got? 537. Hit the like button. Subscribe if you get a chance. If you're new here, check out rotoscouts.com. Access to everything. NBA, NHL, NFL right now. MLB coming right around the corner. Under $1 a day for a weekly, monthly, or quarterly plan. No price uptick next week. No price uptick next month. Everything's going to stay exactly where you bought in on it. It's not a promo. It's not a scam. It's just nice, straightforward, friendly pricing to keep your money in your bankroll, help you build your bankroll the right way. And it's geared toward the people who are out there building 1 lineup, 5 lineups, 20 lineups. Everything works just as well for the people building 150 a night and rolling with massive entry fees. But I'm trying to cater to the folks who are playing a few bucks a day. The average Joe. People who are out there worried about how much groceries cost, how much eggs cost. It's a common talking point around the house these days. As I've said a couple times, tell your significant other, hey, go buy eggs. I'm saving money on my DFS projections. What a world we live in where that's a thing. Anyway, as I was plugging the site, I did not type in any of these ins and outs for Indy. I did get us to Indy. All right, so Nembhard, Mathurin. Grab the rest of the board here. None of those guys are going to matter, really. Just take them out anyway. All right. Since the start of December, with Nembhard and Mathurin both out, just a 101-minute sample for Hallie. But he takes a noteworthy jump. 1.58. I had him at 1.16 for this game. They're losing a little bit of pace. But he will definitely see an uptick more than a tickle. That's a significant enough rate. It's not a big sample, but there's enough meat there. And that's one we could take further back. Like if we just go to the beginning of this year, we could even take it, obviously, into last year. 127 over 213 minutes and 458 possessions going back to the beginning of October. So somewhere in between, probably leaning more toward 125 to 129, 130, somewhere in that range, with maybe a little bit more. But that will be a nice little uptick on Halliburton. Siakam is closer to the mark. I had him at 1.13 for today, game environment and everything included. He's played 289 minutes, 622 possessions in this situation at 1.16. So a little bit of an uptick. That's closer to what I was expecting. And then the mixers, could be a spot where we see more McConnell, which could get interesting. Anytime TJ picks up some minutes, I'm always going to be at least curious. He's right on the mark for where I have him today in 385 minutes, 837 possessions in this situation, 1.17. That's exactly where I had him projected. It's just going to be a time thing probably. Ben Shepherd has not been good in this situation. 238 minutes, 513 possessions of 0.54. That's down from 0.60. Not a big downturn, but it's just not good. Obi should be decent. We'll see what happens with the minutes. I had him at 16. I would expect more. In 296 minutes, 635 possessions, he's played this situation at 1.03, which is slightly under where I had him, but I would probably leave him alone or give him credit for a little bit of an uptick. And then, the hell am I missing? There's somebody I didn't mention. Neesmith. Small sample for him, just 43 minutes, 99 possessions, 0.90, which would be an uptick. He would probably just be represented more by minutes than like a direct rate uptick. I had him at 20, but there will be more there. It's going to be a big void of minutes to fill. Nemhard and Matherin were 56 minutes. So a lot of room there, but definitely at the top end, a couple guys to watch. And then if I'm playing favorites or if I'm just chasing rate, TJ McConnell all day, but give me a minute to actually think that through and look back at recent games of this situation as far as those minutes go. Power says Neesmith at 3,300 looking like a play. Yeah, that price is pretty cheap. I will say that. I would rather have Neesmith than Ben Shepherd. Significantly different producers as far as per minute. But if I could get there for 800 more, I'd rather have TJ McConnell, I think, if I can get there on minutes, than Neesmith, given the gulf of production between those two guys in a per minute sense. But obviously priced different for that reason. But yep, more emergent value on the way as far as this slate goes. I know you guys couldn't see that other screen, by the way. Apologies for that. It's just in the actual model file. What else is in chat? Anything? Nothing crazy coming through chat right now. Keep an eye on the news. Guys we haven't talked about. Let's see. We did touch on Wemby. It was kind of in the context of Jokic, but again, not a ton of him, but one of the best per minute producers on the slate. Top 3 at worst. I think he's second. So you can absolutely come away from this with more Wemby than is represented here and be perfectly fine. Just know that you're bending the slate to your will rather than kind of following the numbers. Trey Murphy, not a bad mixer, 7,800. We got him less than the field, but I wouldn't mind having some. He's a good per minute guy, 1.03. Rock solid minutes in the 35, 36 range. He played 38.9 the other day, put up a 35.9, slightly under a point per minute, but we'll take it. That's more along the lines of what he was last year. But there's enough there on a slate like this, and he kind of fits in as one of those fairly priced upper mid-range guys who outperforms his salary still just by a little bit. So I don't mind having some Trey, but we did get him lighter than the field. Khalil Ware, another interesting center, just boxed out of opportunity by those value guys. Again, with 90+% going through Diabate and Joval, there's just not room for these other center options on FanDuel. But it absolutely needs to be noted that Khalil Ware is pulling a 5.24 value score on FanDuel when we're looking for 5. He looks very good. He is very, very playable. It's just a matter of how much of this are you playing. If you're building like 5 lineups, though, there's nothing wrong with saying, well, maybe you need 10. Saying like in 10, saying like, 2 apiece for these guys, and then give me a Jokic, give me a Wemby, give me a Khalil Ware, and go about it that way and have some representation of those guys in your smaller portfolio of lineups. In 150, I would definitely consider carving out a little bit of a position just because the value's there on that 5.24. So it's just a matter of how you want to shape your portfolio at that point and whether or not you're utilizing these to the absolute extreme as far as those value plays, or if you go a little lighter on those, you'll have more room just in the who goes through the center spot. Kelly O and Grady Dick are both out. Bruce Brown on a rocket ship to the moon for power. Fun. Everybody's on the board. All right. So I had him at 24. He is a good per minute player. The usage has been there in his moderate sample, 13 games, 20 minutes a night so far. I question what the ceiling. Well, actually, no. He gave us 29 the last time out, so the 30-minute mark is there easily. Yeah, no issues on that one. I think we're going to end up liking that. 5,000 on FanDuel, a little bit less probably than on DK, but that did work already a little bit more on FanDuel, surprisingly. Even though he's got an MPE on DraftKings, it's kind of surprising. I think I said surprising twice in like 2 seconds about this play. Yeah, you're going to have more of it. No doubt. We were not getting any Jakob Poeltl on FanDuel. 0% at 73. At 66, we got him a little bit. 3%. We were below the field. I don't really expect that to change. Scotty and RJ probably land about the same. The Boucher thing is probably going to get at least conversational for a few additional minutes. You did say no Kelly O, right? Yeah. That's one that I hate. Anytime Chris Boucher's name comes up in more than 12 to 0 to 12 to 14 minutes. Because he is a good per minute guy. But those minutes just are dicey to chase. David Mitchell's never a guy that I like, but he'll come up a little bit more. And then you have the Jamal Sheds of the world. Agbaji will get more. I have it at 20 and 16 right now. I would probably still continue to chase that line, I think. But, yep, some movement coming on them too. Fantastic. Don't forget about Sharp. Did you ask about Sharp, bud? I missed that, Del. I apologize. I wasn't forgetting you. I just hadn't seen it. Are we talking about Daron? Hopefully not. What Sharp are we talking about? Don't forget about Daron Sharp. So I actually put a mark on him before when I was talking about them, when I noticed that he had that uptick in minutes in the last game. Like I said, if I could find a way to get to a few more minutes for him, I would love to. I could look at that. Pull up the old popcorn machine here. Where did those minutes come from? It was a moderately competitive game. Picked up an additional 3.5 of blowout run at the very end of the game. They were down 17 points at that point. And that's kind of the key couple few minutes that we're talking about. He played 3.5 at the beginning of the fourth and then 3.5 at the end of the fourth, playing alongside Beekman, Tyrese Martin, Jalen, and Keon. I could see him getting there. I don't know if I can see projecting it for him. And that's kind of a key difference in what we do as far as how this all works. You don't necessarily want to throw him those minutes and skew everything, because that suggests that he's got upside beyond that, where it's that would be projecting his ceiling almost. But yeah, I mean, I could see him absolutely, for whatever time he's out there for, I could see him absolutely going nuclear in that matchup. And then if you can find a way to those extra 5 minutes, you could be in business with it. That's why I put the flag on him initially. I'll continue arguing with myself after the show. We're going to end this in the next couple of minutes because I got to get some updates in on a lot of news. What's turning into a pretty big news day. Top optimal on FanDuel, the guy coming up the most in our top 150 on FanDuel is Nick Smith. Essentially any of the Charlotte guys. Pick your poison with those guys. I don't mind saying Miles Bridges for that answer because of just what I was talking about before, him just being the pure best per minute guy out of that game. There should be tons and tons of opportunity for Miles Bridges in that one. You could easily say if he's out there, Jason Tatum, though, given how much he's coming up. So it depends on what caliber player we're talking about, too. So you've got a value answer, a mid-board answer, and a star answer there. And all three of them are coming up above 50% of the time in our sim on FanDuel. Mobley's not bad in that bucket. Diabate and Jovel go back and forth. Those are the two pure raw value plays of the day. It's just when we're talking in terms of, and it might be different as far as which one's more purely optimal, but when it comes to which ones came up in our top 150, they have an almost directly even split as our top two values through the center spot. Yeah, especially in that format as a pivot point. And again, it's not, you don't want to go radically out of your way for your pivots. Like I say a lot, you want to be making small moves, but the larger the field, there's more justification for stepping out. And it always comes down to if you're projecting it differently, then of course, if I decided to give those 23 minutes to Day'Ron, he would look, I'm sure. Let's see what that total would look like. I can't resim it, but if I gave him that, so it'd still be a little bit short of our value mark of 5.5 technically, but he would go up to a solid 25 and change DraftKings points for your 4,800. At worst, he'd be competitive in like this range where we're getting some shares. We got at a 5.41. That's a very different kind of a play. 5,800 at a 5.44 value score for 31 points of Jalen Duren. We got at like 5%. You could see him competing maybe in this kind of a range against that 4.99. He would probably outpace those shares of Nikola Jovic and collect some ground. So yeah, I think he would get on the board in that case, but it would be a matter of like you're projecting him differently. In the situation, the way I've got it projected, it's a lot less appealing of a play. So it really, really comes down to that. And let me make sure to fix that so that I don't accidentally push that out into the world right now. Keep an eye on it. All right. Pritchard or Holiday? Did we get any Celtics news yet? I haven't seen the Boston news. Well, news in general, Caleb Martin is out. Kelly O is out. Grady Dick is out. Kobe White is out. Benedict Mather and Andrew Nembhard are both out. We don't have Celts news. Reason I asked was just in case it was creating more of a situation. I don't know that either of those guys was really coming up all that relevant. At 2% of Drew across sites and just like one share of Peyton Pritchard on FanDuel. Couple shares we actually did get a little bit more, like one share more of Peyton Pritchard, but they were both 2% type range. But you do have better value score on Pritchard. You've got actually technically a slightly higher raw projection for 100 less on Peyton Pritchard. So I guess my answer there is Peyton Pritchard. I hadn't really considered a direct heads up between those two yet. But yeah, the per minute upside is there. 0.97 versus 0.84 across all situations this season. You're getting better true shooting, slightly better assist rate, essentially the same rebounding. Well, slightly better rebounding. We'll give Drew his credit where it's due. But definitely the better fantasy performer, the better per minute performer this season for essentially the same price, same positioning has been Pritchard. So yeah, go in that direction. And again, great game environment, great spot. He's projected at 27 minutes. I could easily see him playing into the 30s, especially if they're lighting up Chicago. No reason for him not to. So yeah. Between the two, strong lean toward Peyton Pritchard now that we're talking it through. And that's a play that could be more appealing than it even looks like on this board. Looks like that's about it. Small crew still here hanging out. I know other shows kick off in the 5 o'clock hour, so I appreciate all the diehards. Hit the like button. Subscribe if you're new, if you haven't before. Subscribe and then mute the notifications if you don't want them. Doesn't bother me. Helps out a little bit. Mama, that's your sneaky play for the day? I like it. That's not a bad call. I just like the Boston side of that going up against Chicago. And then especially if you get an additional bubble of opportunity around some of those guys, even better. But thank you guys very much. Absolutely rock. Best crowd in the industry, no doubt about it. So one last time, check out rotoscouts.com. Check out acemind.io for sim and optimization needs, especially coming into baseball season soon. Promo code rotoscouts still gets you 20% off your first month over there. Subscribe for under $1 a day at Rotoscouts for access to everything. Everything we got. And anything that might be coming under $1 a day. With that, good luck out there. Somebody go win something. Share it when you do. And I'll see you tomorrow for more. Later, guys.